Hey, Mike. Good to see you.
Doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great.
Yeah.
So here we are, this beautiful Sunday morning. It's nice out. So anyway, hey, I got two items I kind of wanted to cover. It's kind of like a podcast where it's like we're going to do two items in one podcast, okay? But one of these, I kind of got inspired by a talk that you gave a while back. And this is kind of regarding, there's a few things you could roll up into this, I guess, but it basically keeping cool in stressful situations. And I've got some ideas on how to do that are a little bit different than maybe the physicality of it. But you talk a little bit about this, of course, in Gorilla Mindset, but talk to me about how you handle a stressful situation and some of your stuff, whether it be breathing, whether it be, body language, whatever it is. I think we all run into these situations, whether it be, an argument with a family member that maybe triggers you, or something crazy happens at work, or, a legal issue, or, an addiction issue, or, somebody breaks into your car and smashes all the windows. I mean, talk to me about this and how does Mike Cernovich keep his cool in situations?
Yeah, we've talked about this before, which is that you always want to deconstruct whatever a negative feeling is. That's how you, I guess, how I came up with Gorilla Mindset. So here's what I mean by that is when I was in a bad mood, I would just say like, well, what's the physiology of a bad mood? And what do you do when you're in a bad mood? And when you're angry, what do you do? And I thought about that. And then I realized anger is what you would call a forward emotion. And here's why that matters, because we always start conceptually a little abstract. And have you ever heard the expression "take a step back"? Right?
Sure.
Okay. Well, that's an embedded metaphor of our language, which is that anger is forward moving. So if you're angry, you're going forwards into some situation, and probably bad, like a bull charging forward. So then what I would tell people is I go, well, if you're angry, sit back. People go, well, that's dumb. Have you tried it? No. Okay, well, how about you try it next time? To give people my little, BITCH face. Because so much people are like, well, that's dumb. Have you tried it? No. Okay. Why don't you try it? And you find out, okay, if you're angry, your body language is forward facing, your shoulders are pronated, you're leaning forward, you're wound up, wound tight. Just lean back. Lean back a little bit. Now, does that cure it? No, but it gets you adopting the mindset of realizing, okay, anger is a forward emotion. Depression is a backward emotion. So if you're depressed, you just, the weight of the world. I feel the weight of the world upon me. These are metaphors we live by. George Lakoff wrote a great book about how the metaphorical structure of our language controls our lives, or how our lives are controlled by our metaphors. It's very chicken and egg. So, for example, in subcultures and some cultures, time is behind us because we can't see time. The past is in front of us because we can see the past. And yeah, that actually makes sense. But in our world, the future, you're facing the future. You have your whole life ahead of you. Your future's in front of you. And that's how we understand time, and time is behind us. You can't go back in time. But no, you could say that the past is in front of us because that's what we can see. The future is behind us. The future is uncertain. And if you view the future as uncertain, culturally, you're less likely to evolve because you'll spend too much time ruminating over the past because the past is in front of you. So that's an example of a metaphorical structure. And then you start to notice these language patterns. I feel the weight of the world upon me, the gravity. He was weighed down, albatross around his neck, probably 100 other ways of saying, okay, so depression is backward moving, anger is forward moving. So if you're depressed, lean forward a little bit. Don't lay down. Just sit down. I'm still depressed. Yes, you don't get to flip a switch and magically you're not depressed anymore. If you're angry, lean back. You're not magically angry anymore, but you're resetting your emotions because you're providing a counterweight to how you feel. So that's one, is you always analyze yourself. I'm mad, I'm fired. You can see you get tense. Okay. People go, relax. Well, relax doesn't help you. How do you relax if you're tense? Well, if you're relaxed and you're tense, just open your hands. right? Because nobody who's angry is laying back. If you're angry, you're not leaning back, resting. Now your mind is still going to spiral out of control. Again, anger is a movement emotion, forward moving. My mind was spiraling out of control. Well, that, you're angry, but you start to, again, wind down a little bit. So you realize, okay, if you're angry, don't keep going forward. Negate the emotion by doing its opposite. So if you're clenching your fists, you open your hands up. Draw your shoulders back. Flex your scapula. Bring your subscapula into your back. Lean back physically. Maybe go lay down. It's hard to, you notice when you're angry, it's hard to lay down, right? You're in bed, about to fall asleep, and something hits you, and you want to get out of bed. And you want to stir, right? It's very actually hard to remain angry if you're laying down. So the answer to that is you just keep laying down rather than just say, oh, I'm just going to stop being angry. We don't stop being anything. We find the duality of all things. We find the duality of anger, the opposite of anger. If you're depressed, you find the opposite of depression, where just one step forward could be. So that's how you start to hack into the physiology. Same thing too. We did a whole talk on public speaking. And the number one public speaking tip that I have for people is learn how to control your breathing, because if your breath is under your control, you're not going to be afraid. How can that be? It goes back to what we just talked about. Analyze your physiology. If you're breathing rhythmically and in control, you're not going to be fearful because you're focusing on your breathing. You're not focusing on whatever you're afraid of. And when you're afraid, your breathing becomes shallow. So again, everything I always teach people, you have to learn how to view your body as a machine. So I don't view my body as organic matter. I view it as a machine that I've been placed in. And sometimes the machine just needs like a tweak. And I find out, okay, if the engine's revving too quickly, then you turn down the regulator a little bit, right? Same thing. Okay, your breathing is shallow. Why is it too shallow? Because you're angry. Okay, control your breathing. Learn how to control your breathing. Deeper breaths in through your stomach. And then suddenly you figure out you're not even afraid anymore because you become so focused on your breathing. And that's, again, how you hack into your physiology. And you do that with all of your emotions. And it isn't easy, but a lot of times the best you can do is you just mitigate a bad circumstance.
And so you do some exercises when we're talking about breathing. You do some cold water exercises. I think you use your swimming pool in the wintertime, or you've got an ice bath, or these kinds of things. Do you feel those things really help in training your body to respond in the way that you want it to?
Yes, I'm big on the Wim Hof breathing. I've recommended his stuff a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's for a number of reasons. One is because when you get into cold water, even if you've done it for a long time, it's miserable. It's never not unpleasant.
Right.
Can't wait to dive into cold water and have my body go into some kind of like physiological shock. But you get in there and you're terrified. And then there's always trepidation before you get in the cold water. That's why it's such a beautiful way to just deal with your fear every day. Is you're not like and then when you get into the cold water and you control your breathing, you calm down, and then you think, why was I even afraid 10 seconds ago, right? But then the very next day or even the next round, that's what's so beautiful about fear, how it really never goes away. A lot of times I'll do 5 rounds hot, cold. I jump into the cold, and then why was I even afraid? That was dumb. I'm calm. I'm great. Get out, right. Hot water, back in the cold. Oh God, I don't want to do this again. Even though you've went through that process over and over again. And you just learn, okay, why was I afraid? And then, of course, you develop a singularity of focus, which is, for all of us, there's so much going on all the time.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that we just focus on any one feeling, experience, emotion. When you're in the cold water, it is a binary. You're either going to stay in or you're going to get out. I don't care how many bills you have, or if you got broken up with, or whatever issues people are dealing with. There will be a point, if you're in the water long enough, where that will not even be in your consciousness, because the only thing you'll focus on is staying in the water for another second. That's all you'll focus on. And then as you do it more, you do hit like a euphoric state where you get out and you feel like you have almost like a God consciousness where you're aware of everything simultaneously. And then that's why people who do it tend to, even though it's not fun, that's why people who do it tend to keep doing it. So you go in and you come out and it's endorphins, and I'm sure there's a physiological explanation for it. But then you feel like you have a sort of hyper awareness. And then of course your body warms up again naturally, and whatever bullshit you were dealing with before, you're going to deal with there. But you're better equipped to deal with it, because we all get into these situations. There was a great book it's called The Last Lecture. It was a professor had a pancreatic cancer, and he went on a teaching series or a lecture series called The Last Lecture, and then he wrote a book. And so many times, myself included, we focus on utterly solvable problems, but we only focus on the problem. One example he gave was a student came to him and said, "Oh my God, I'm freaking out. I have this credit card bill and panicking." And he's like, "Well, how often do you think about it?" She's like, "Well, all day and all night, really, And he said, "Well, so 4 hours a day?" And she said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, why don't you just wait tables for 4 hours a day? And you'd have the credit card bill paid off in like 8 weeks." And to her, yes. And then she did it and paid it back. But that's all of us. We just deal with different problems at scale. Oh, I'm afraid that this thing is going to happen. And most of the time, like, there's some things out of our concern, out of our care. And by care, I don't mean emotionally. I mean, there's nothing we can do to change it. Your child has cancer or something. Okay, there's nothing you can do about that. You're just going to be depressed. You got to use the mindset techniques to keep it together as much as you can. But that's 1 in 10,000. That's not, most people are freaking out about, oh, this is going bad or this is going south. And okay, keep a diary. How many nights is this ruined? 4 of your nights? How many hours? 20 hours? You could go dig through trash cans and probably make enough money to solve that. Or you could get a menial job on Upwork or something, making $10 or $15 an hour and put a dent into it. Even if you think about just the smallest amounts of money. But unless you're really improving your focus, and when you're in the cold water, your focus is on your just very survival, or it's very much singular. Am I going to get in, or am I going to get out of the cold water? Unless you're training that regularly, when life hits you, oh my God, what am I going to do? Things are getting out of control or whatever. And almost never should that be the case of people. And I'm not perfect. I certainly, because the only difference between me and everyone else is I just have the tools. So when I see this stuff happening, I'm like, yeah, you're really wound up about that. But if you just did these 3 or 4 other things, then whatever you're worried about would just go away. It wouldn't even be an issue. So why are you doing this? And then I check myself and adjust it. That's what is applicable in 1 in 1,000. There's a 1 in 1,000 where it's just going to be bad, right?
Yeah.
Just no way around.
And I've certainly found, through maybe in a less physical way, but, I learned this about myself when I was young, that if I start to slow down what I'm doing, then I start to get depressed. Okay. So if I don't have 8 different things going on, Mike gets depressed, right? So I have to, the way that I do it is I compartmentalize by having multiple activities going on. Now, for me, that's always been business things. So I'm able to kind of take that anxiety or that fear and route that into money-making pursuits, which has served me very, very well. But I do know that if I start to throttle back, I have to fill that void with something, right? And it could be, like we had a podcast, prior podcast where we talked about writing. Okay. So for me, I might throttle back on a business of mine, but I've got to refill that. So maybe I refill that with starting a blog and writing or something. So for me, it's keeping my mind active on different pursuits. And if I don't do that, I do kind of fall into a depression, or I start having irrational fears about, oh my gosh, this could happen or that could happen. I mean, I still have a fear of like, man, if this doesn't work out, how am I going to eat? and I haven't had that fear since I was like 20 years old, right? But I still kind of revert back to that where I'm like, I got to keep busy. So I do that whole compartmentalizing things where I take different ideas, but I try to stick them in a box, and then I keep the lid on that box by jumping over and starting to work on another thing and taking that out of the box to work on it. So for me, it's shifting my mind around strategically without that worry. It's like that person that you talk about with the credit card bill. Well, that would be me. That's how I would fix it, is I would go and I would get a job waiting tables 4 hours, and then I'd come home, and if I was worrying about it again, I'd start a blog and try to do some affiliate links or something. So that's how I deal with that stuff, is try to pour myself into my craft or create a new craft to work on.
Or work yourself into exhaustion. I'm a big fan of that. I got it from Dale Carnegie. He wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, but he also wrote How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And very often that just work yourself until you can't be worried. So if you're laying in bed at night and your mind is spinning, you can meditate. Is that working? No. Self-hypnosis working? No. Binaural beats working? No. Okay, get up and work until 3 a.m. Right. And then just get up tired as all hell and work and collapse when you go into bed. There's just something you said for work yourself into exhaustion.
Yeah, and actually, I have had that throughout my life where I've run into some very stressful things in my career, and people are like, how do you handle the stress? Well, you know what? I work all day, do some family stuff, and then work some more. I fall into my bed exhausted. I wake up 3 or 4 hours later with an unbelievable amount of anxiety, and I freaking get up and work on my computer for an hour and a half until I'm exhausted again, and then get back into bed and sleep for another 3 hours. And if that's the way you have to do it and work through it, and you know what? At the end of the day, when you look backwards, you're like, man, I really got a lot done, and that anxiety propelled me forward. So I actually use that as a gift to propel me further down the road. And a lot of times that's what happens, at least in my life, that's always happened, is, you have these irrational fears about things, or you build something up to be bigger than it really is. And then if you're able to take that energy and plow that into something that's productive, you can actually turn this wart into something beautiful. So, or certainly something that puts you further down the path on whatever path you're on. So,
and it beats the hell out of just whining. It just beats the hell out of just stressing out, because the time, so much of mindset is just, you're going to spend the time anyway.
Right.
Even like when I parent with Syra and she throws a tantrum, I just say, Syra, do you feel good? No. Okay, well then why would you throw a tantrum? You don't feel good about it. But in our own mind, I realized this raising a kid, we still are controlled by a lot of these just id forces where I'm just going to be in a bad mood for 4 hours. Okay, you're going to be the 4 hours is going to occupy you, or you're going to occupy it, however we perceive time and our relationship to it. But you're either going to be there wound up and miserable, or you could just go take a walk for 4 hours until your feet hurt so much. And then suddenly whatever you were stressing out about, you're now thinking, my feet are swollen up from, walking 15 miles or something like that.
Exactly.
Now you're focusing on something else. But we're not just instructed on how to do all this stuff. Nobody tells you that. Everybody just says you go from a state of being to a state of not being, which isn't how it works. Just stop being angry. Well, you can't, but you can take a step back. You can open your hands up. You can retract your scapula. You can go lay down. And if you're so angry that you can't get off the bed, or that you can't sit still, good, stay in bed. And throw your phone against the wall too, because you're about to do something really self-destructive.
For me too, and I think that this is kind of some of that mundane stuff that people say, oh, well, these podcasters, some of this stuff's really boring. And this subject right here might not be the most interesting subject in the world, but if you grasp, this was 17, 18 minutes, if you grasp what was just explained to you, I don't think I can overestimate how powerful this will be in your life. This is like a real life skill that sometimes people take 10 or 15, 20 years even to figure this stuff out. And if you're taking this and you can deploy this into your own life right now, the impact that this could have positively within your life is really, really, really beneficial. It took me a long time to really look backwards and understand this.
Sure, nobody wants to hear the basics. Everybody wants to hear like the latest move or the latest. People are doing cry or whatever. Like cryo is great, ice baths are great, far infrared saunas are great. I'm a big fan of this all great stuff, but people just don't want to learn the basics. And if you don't ever master the basics, you shouldn't be focusing on this friend stuff. I would notice that too, even with like health and fitness people. Oh, how many grams of carbohydrates relative to protein post workout? And they're not even lifting. You see them in the gym, they're not even lifting hard. Because they don't even know how to lift. They don't even know how to perform a basic lift. And that's what so much of mindset is applying the basics, reinforcing the basics, and then you become better at the basics. And Jean-Jacques Machado, actually a jiu-jitsu guy, said that the more he learns all the new moves, and he says the more moves he learns, the fewer moves uses.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay, so shifting gears here a little bit. I get a lot of these. You probably get a zillion of these, but something that we've talked about in the past was about how to network with people and building networks and things like that. One thing we haven't talked about, which I think a lot of people need a lot of help with, is how to properly network online. Okay, so yesterday I got 3 messages on, I don't know if it was Messenger or Twitter or Instagram, whatever, where I've got a guy in this one instance where he sends me the wavy emoji like this, and then, how are you, Mike? Don't know this person, never met him, don't know anything about him. Subsequently, I get 2 more that are virtually the same thing, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm a busy guy. I'm a busy guy. A lot of people out there are really busy people. Who taught these people, or why do they not understand how to approach people online? It's just, I'm flabbergasted.
It's how to win friends and influence people. There's an answer to that. The answer is they've never read How to Win Friends and Influence People, the basics. They want, they're on Twitter and social media and, these message boards and God knows what else. Like, have you read How to Win Friends and Influence People? No. Okay, then don't talk to me. Don't send me an email. Don't send me a message. Just don't, because you won't even do that basic fundamental, develop that basic fundamental skill. And that's why, because most people aren't raised well. People are like raised by wolves, myself included. I had to learn everything. Everything I know I had to learn. And then as I learned, I was able to apply my own techniques and my own moves to it. But yeah, I had to learn, okay, you're going to pitch somebody. How are you going to pitch them? Well, make sure you spell their name right. You wouldn't believe how many people can't even spell your name right.
Oh.
And you start off Mr. Boleyn, comma. Maybe some people would use a colon because maybe that's a little bit more formal. But if you don't even know that you would say Mr. Boleyn, maybe use a comma, maybe use a colon. Just stop right there and go read How to Win Friends and Influence People, because you don't even know that there's a certain style, especially amongst people in, an older generation. Mr. Boleyn, comma. I really enjoyed your podcast about X. It made me think of Y. And then do your pitch. And don't ask for money. Ask for advice. If you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money.
And I'll tell you something. With getting these messages on a more routine basis, it is shocking. And I actually don't like the DMs. Let me just say that. I don't care what platform you're on, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Stop using the frickin' DMs. If I start a thread on Twitter and it's a thread about how to buy a house, okay, an investment property, why are you DMing me, asking me some mundane question about it? At least get into the fucking conversation online. We're doing this online, right? It's not like anything that you're asking me is top secret government classified information that needs to be hidden from everybody else. This is another thing. It's like a pet peeve, right? It drives me insane. Why are you DMing me? Put it on the freaking post. Have the conversation. At least everybody else can participate and maybe even add some value that I cannot add.
Yeah, there's a lot of so people, if you're listening, don't DM him, ask him in the thread. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, it's get into the thread, get into the conversation. I'm far more likely to respond to you in a DM later if I'm like, oh, well, this guy, we've commented and gone back and forth on Twitter a few times, and he seems halfway intelligent, and he asks some, interesting leverage questions that you can't just readily Google and stuff. And I'm like, oh, well, this guy's kind of, he's done some homework. He's intelligent. Interesting guy. And then, maybe he DMs me, for some advice when I'm not tweeting or talking about that thing. That makes more sense to me. But just out of nowhere, send these DMs is just, folks, stop doing it. And for somebody like you, you probably don't even look at them anymore.
I skim them, I get way too many to keep track of.
Yeah. So it's just one of those things. And I think that that's real basic online networking stuff is get involved in the conversation. And maybe you got a different take, but for me, it's
even better.
Yeah. Get involved in the conversation. I mean, hey, maybe
we'll do it better. Leave a review if you're on the iTunes store for the podcast with your question. Say, rate the podcast, and then post your question, and then we'll answer those questions. So you can say, whatever your review of the podcast is, and then you can say what I like about the podcast, and then post your question. We'll read all of those.
We could do a really great episode on that. So let's plan on doing that, folks. Go onto the iTunes, do your review, and then ask a question, and then we'll go through and knock those out. We could do like a little screen capture for each one, put it up on the screen, and then and we've got the technology to do that. Mike and I both got some fancy new podcast equipment here for season 2. And we could put that up on the screen and then go through each one of those questions, assuming that they're not horrible questions.
Yep. Perfect. All right. So on that note, if you're listening on a device, it's pretty easy. You just swipe over, put the star rating, type in a few words, hit submit, takes you less than 30 seconds. And those questions we'll be answering in a special edition of this podcast.
I'd love that. Okay, that's great. Okay, Mike, it was good seeing you today. We got some great information here. Hopefully some people can put it into play.